So positioning allows you to control how elements are placed on a web page. It provides a way to create complex layouts by changing the flow of elements and specifying their exact positions. And then we have 5 positioning types. The first one is static, which is the default. So every element have this static position. All right. So static position, this is the default positioning for all elements. Elements are placed according to the normal document flow with no special positioning applied. And then it does not respond to positioning properties like top, bottom, left, or right. Then we have relative positioning. The relative position, the element is positioned relative to its normal position in the document flow. And you can use top, bottom, left, and right properties to adjust its position. Then space for the element is still reserved in the normal flow. So this is a good example. If you say position relative top 20 pixels, so this moves the element downward by 10 pixels. And then if you say left, so this moves the element right by 20 pixels. We have absolute. Absolute, the element is positioned relative to its nearest positioned ancestors. So an ancestor with position relative, absolute, or fixed. So if no positioned ancestor is found, it is positioned relative to its initial containing block, usually the HTML element. All right, we're going to see that shortly. And then we have fixed. So the element is positioned relative to the viewport, meaning it stays in the same place even when the page is scrolled. And then it is removed from the document flow, similar to absolute positioning. So this is useful for creating sticky headers, sidebars, or back to top buttons. And here is a perfect example: position fixed, bottom 0, right 0. And then we have sticky, which is the last one. So sticky positioning, a hybrid between relative and fixed positioning. The element is treated as relative until it reaches a specific scroll position. Then it sticks and becomes fixed. All right. So let's see the first one. Actually, we're not going, there's nothing to look at on the first one, which is the static, because that's the default for every element in HTML. So every element has a static position property by default. Okay, so then for relative, let's look at the HTML document and then we look at the CSS. Oh, I guess we don't need this, or maybe we should just leave this the way it is. Look at the body. We have the header, which has H1 CSS relative position. And then we have the main. The main has a section, and the section has 3 divs. Okay, 1, 2, 3. The first div has an ID of box 1, and then the second one has an ID of box 2, third one has an ID of box 3. And here is the final result, okay, for that element. And then for the header, first we have this universal selector. Again, we are setting all the default margin and padding to 0, and then box sizing to border box. Then the header has a background of orange, and we can see that it has a background of orange. And then padding to the top and bottom 15 pixels, left and right 0. And then text align to the center, and then margin bottom to 40 pixels. So text align. So the child element inherits the text align property, which makes the content to be at the center of the container. And then padding to the top and bottom 15 pixels, and then we have margin bottom or padding 45 pixels, right? Yeah, no, 40 pixels basically. And then section. The section, we only have one section in our document, which is this section right here, right? So the section has a 3 pixel solid orange red border. 3 pixels solid orange red. So this border right here, the outline, is coming from the section or the property we set on the section elements. And then padding to the top and bottom 10 pixels. Right, and then main has a height of 120 pixels. So this means, sorry, 120 120 viewport height. So it means that this viewport will take 120%, right? And that is why we can actually scroll, because the main now has a 120 viewport height. And then the div has a border of each of the div, right? We have three divs actually, 1, 2, 3, right? So which means all we have a 2 pixel solid purple border width and height of 80 pixels, and then margin to the bottom 5 pixels. Margin to the bottom 5 pixels. So back to the web page. These are the three divs, the boxes 1, 2, 3. So width and height 80 pixels, width of 80 and height of 80 pixels, and then border of purple, border of 2 pixels, okay, and then solid style, and then purple color. Same thing for the second box, and then for the third box as well, because it has a div element. So that's that. Now let's now start with positioning, the relative positioning, right? So relative positioning is position relatively to itself. So I'm going to set position relative on the second box and then move it a bit away from this edge. All right, so I'm going to do is so this div here, box 2, right? So it has an ID of box 2. So in my style, I'm going to say, so because it is an ID, we're going to use the hash and then followed by the ID name box 2. And then open up the declaration block. And then say position relative, save. To the browser. If I refresh, nothing is going to happen because we haven't moved it yet using the top, bottom, right, or left. So if I want to move this, if I want to shift it a bit to the right, so I'm going to increase the value of the left property. All right, so I will say left of maybe 50 pixels. If I refresh now, you see I have successfully shifted the box away to the right by setting the left property to 50 pixels. And mind you, this left property will not work unless there is position property. So left 50 pixels was able to have an effect on that element because we have a position property set to relative, or a position property actually exists on this selector. So we have left, we have top, we have bottom, and we have right. So if I want to shift it or move it downward, so I can actually say 50 pixels. So if I do this, so I have been able to move this element downward. All right. So that's that for relative. The next one is absolute. Absolute. So I'm going to load. Oh, okay. So I think I need two because that's the document. Good. So CSS absolute position, and it's this document right here. Okay. Now, for instance, if I actually want to move box 2, right? If I want to keep it at the extreme edge, that is the top right corner. Yeah, that's right corner. Yes, the top right corner of its parent, which is this section with orange red border, right? I can use absolute positioning. So I will take it back, and then so box 2 again, the div with an ID of box 2. Box 2. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is to say position absolute. Position absolute. Save. Okay, to the browser. So is this box 2, right? Look at what we have now. Great. Now, the first thing that happened is that element is taken out of the normal flow of the document. If I take us back to the slide, right? The absolute position portion, it says that what the element is positioned relative to its nearest position ancestor. Okay, this is not the catch. Now look at this third point here. It says that the element is removed from the normal document flow and other elements behave as if it does not exist. So which means the space that was provided for box 3 inside this section or inside this box with orange red border has been taken or has been removed, such that the other element box 1 and box 3 will behave as if box 2 never exists. That is what that line actually means. So now if I give this element now top of 0, okay, top property is 0, it means that I want to push the elements to the top of the parent element. But now it's not going to be at the top of the parent element. Instead, it will actually go to the viewport, top of the viewport. If I refresh now, we have box 2 at this top here. And that's because we have not set the position property on the parent element. All right, back to the slide. It says that the element is positioned relative to its nearest positioned ancestor. That is, an ancestor with position property set to either relative, absolute, or fixed. So at this point, now, if no positioned ancestor is found, it is positioned relative to the initial containing element, usually the HTML element. So the HTML element actually starts from the very top, right? And that is why box 2 is now positioned to the HTML element. But if you want box 2 to be positioned to its parent element, which is this section with orange red border, right? It means that you have to select this section here in your style, so this section, and then give it position property of relative. Position relative. Great. So now what's going to happen is that this box now will now be forced to be position relative to its parent element, because the parent element, which is section, now has a position property of relative. So if I refresh now, you see it is back to the extreme top of its parent element. But then I want it to be at the top right corner of the parent element. So that way I can now set the right property to 0 on box 2 rather. So box 2 right 0. So if I refresh, you see I have pushed, or I have positioned box 2 now to this end. So that's about absolute position. The next one is fixed. Let's see, fixed position. Fixed, good. So CSS fixed position. Again on the slide, the element is positioned relative to the viewport, meaning it stays in the same place even when the page is scrolled. It stays in the same place even when the page is scrolled. So take note of this point right now, right? So what this means is that, for instance, now if this header here, this header with the background of orange, has a position property of fixed, right? It's going to remain the same position even if you are scrolling. Now you see, as I'm scrolling, this header here actually move out of the viewport. I can't see the header at this point. If I keep scrolling, you see box 2 is out. But if an element has a position property of fixed, it will never go out of the viewport. That is what this point here is talking about, that the element is position relative to its viewport, meaning it stays in the same place even when the page is scrolled. And then it is useful. Now, first, it is removed from the document flow, similar to the absolute positioning, and then useful for creating sticky headers, sidebars, or back to top buttons. Now, let's take a look at the back to top button example. Now, what I want to create now is that I'm going to create a button, and I would like to position it somewhere around there, fixed somewhere around there, such that if I'm scrolling, the button will remain, okay, at this position, regardless of the scrolling effect or the movement of the web page. So back to fixed. So in the document, I'm going to create a button. I will say button. I'll say back to top. back to top, save this. Or I can even create a link instead, right? You can create a link, and with that, I can actually say A. So back to top, save this, and then I would like to give this header an ID. So I want to create an anchor link, right? That's internal link. I will give this an ID of header. So which means that anytime we click on this link, header, or let's say home or top, let it stop, top. It doesn't matter, but what matters most is that this href, hypertext reference, has to reference the correct ID that we actually want the page to be scrolled to whenever it is clicked on. So what this means is that if this header is out of viewport and we have access to this button, anytime we click on it, the page will move to this header. All right. So if I save this and head back to the browser, then refresh. I'm looking for our button. Where's our button? Oh, absolute. I've not changed the document. Please. So I'm just going to cut this. I'm still on absolute.html. I don't want absolute. We are done with absolute. So fixed.html. Fixed.html. Still the same document, but right now I'm now adding the button after this section, the closing tag of the section element. So back, then refresh. So great. We have the button right now. But then the first thing that I would like to do is to position this button to somewhere around here. Okay, this part right here, such that if the user is scrolling, the button will still remain on the page. All right, or will still remain within the viewport. So button, so it's a button element, so I can select the button element right here in my style. Button. So first, I will say position fixed. Save. Back to the browser, refresh. So right now, this element has been removed from the normal flow of the document. All right, and right now we need to push it to the bottom and then push it to the right. So to the bottom now, we can set the property to 0, bottom 0. Remember again, this button cannot work unless there is a position property in the declaration block. So save to the browser, refresh. So we have pushed it to the bottom. Now if I want to push it to the right, that means I will set right to 0, right 0. So it's right here, but I actually want it to be somewhere around here. So which means I can still play around with the value of bottom and right. So let's try 50-50. So 50-50%, 50-50 pixels rather. So 50-50 pixels. And then refresh. Okay, great. So look at what's going to happen. If I'm scrolling, you see the button will never get out of the viewport. It will remain in this position. If you scroll from the top to the extreme end, you are still going to have access to the button. And right now, since we have actually successfully create the internal link, which means that anytime I click on this, then it should take me to the top. Right. So if I click this, so now I can see the top. Right. So if I increase the height of our main, so let's say 220% of the viewport height. Now we should be able to scroll enough actually. Fresh, great. So I can scroll very well. So you see right now, I can't even see anything on the screen, but the buttons still remain within the viewport. Now, if I click on the button, it will take me back to the page. It doesn't matter how long I've scrolled or how far I've scrolled the page. So take take me back to the top, basically. That's that for fixed position. And lastly, let's look at the sticky position in CSS, which will bring us to the end of this episode. Sticky. So CSS sticky position. So it's actually a hybrid between relative and fixed positioning. Now the element is treated as relative until it reaches a specific scroll position, then it sticks and becomes fixed. Right. So what I actually want to do right now is that look at this page right now. I can actually scroll. So I want to implement a scenario whereby if I'm scrolling, I want this header to remain sticky. I don't want this header to move. All right. So I can use sticky position to achieve that. If I head back to the browser, to the code rather, and then ensure that I take it back to sticky. Okay. So switch to sticky.html page or web document. What I'm going to do is so it is this header right here. So the header, what I'm going to do is I will say header position sticky, then top 0. So which means when it reaches the top 0 part, we don't want the position or the element to go out of the viewport. It should remain sticky. That is what it means. So save this. Then if I head back to the browser and refresh. Now, if I move now, the only thing that we go out of the viewport is this section and other element that we have. So if I scroll, you see the element remains sticky. The header rather, right? This header now remains sticky and it's not moving. So I'm very sure we have seen this kind of scenario in most websites whereby you will see the header, the logo, and some navigation menu like home, about, contact, testimonial, blog, contact, or services. They remain regardless of how far or how we scroll the web page. So this is how we can achieve this kind of implementation on our web design.